Okay, here we go. We are now recording. All right, everybody.
Hey, Randy.
Oh yeah, Randy. How you doing, Randy?
Hey, Randy.
Hey.
What are you into?
I snuck in right before the prayer.
Yes, very good, very good.
I'm a sneaky kind of guy.
Yeah.
So we're on chapter 5, Stumbling Over the Stumbling Stone.
We are starting in chapter 5, page 65, Stumbling Over the Stumbling Stone, Falling Upward. So that's where we will begin. Any questions, anything hanging over from last week that you guys want to talk about? Okay. So kind of for Jackie's benefit, the book is Falling Upward. The subtitle is A Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life. And so the crux of the book is that we really live our lives in two halves. The first half, our 20s and 30s, and maybe our early 40s, is all focused outward. It's focused on building the platform for life, the material platform for life. So it's family and career and causes and everything that's focused out there. And we derive our meaning, our sense of meaning and purpose from our exterior world. There comes a time, and we can call it the midlife crisis, or we can call it a lot of other things. There comes a time when that starts to lose its color, starts to lose its sense of meaning. And when we realize that there is something deeper to life that we haven't been considering as we've been looking outward. You know, as great as it is to work on family and career and all those things, there's a deeper meaning that we all need as humans. And if we successfully answer the call and make the transition to the second half, then we'll start to look inward and find meaning and purpose is already within us, just as Jesus said the kingdom is already within us. We're not going to find it looking out there someplace. This book is about making that transition to understand the qualities of both the first and the second half of life. And this is not to say that the second half of life is more important than the first half of life, because the second half of life requires that we do a good job establishing the first half of life. Rohr talks about it as establishing the container into which we can put the real content of our lives in the second half. And so building that strong container, building the sense of how we relate to our community and to the people around us, and how we establish those rules of conduct that are going to be so important to being able to live in good community, but to realize that just following rules is not enough, and that something transformative needs to happen from the inside out. And so once we establish a good platform in the first half of life, then we can transcend it. It's kind of like knowing the rules before you can break them, right? Kind of along those lines. And so we've been talking about the first half of life, how important it is, how it functions. And then in the last chapter, we were talking about beginning the transition to the second half of life that always begins with a fall, with a failure, with a descent. And there's that classic shape of the journey, the descent before the ascent. And in the last section that we just finished, we were talking about the tragic sense of life, that we look at the tragedies of life as being evils that we want to pray away, but actually they are the very stones upon which we build the foundation for the second half of life. And now he's going to talk more about that the stumbling stone is what is a trigger for the beginning of the second half of life. There has to be a fall, there has to be a failure, there has to be a wounding. And so he's going to talk more about that now. So with all that said, as kind of a preamble, page 65, we got a couple of epigrams there that are really good. The first one from Isaiah 8:14, God is both sanctuary and stumbling stone. Yahweh is a rock that brings Israel down. The Lord is a trap and a snare for the people. Interesting quote there, huh? God is both sanctuary and stumbling stone. Yahweh is a rock that brings Israel down. The Lord is a trap and a snare for the people. Now he's going to be expanding on that, but it's interesting how there it is, you know, right in the Old Testament, this idea that the way God works in our life, the way life works toward our purpose in life, is going to be as that stumbling stone, as that snare, as that trap. It's going to be the difficulties in life that actually get us where we want to go. And then from W.H. Auden, 20th century poet, we would rather be ruined than changed. We would rather die in our dread than climb the cross of the present and let our illusions die. Ooh, that's a good one. Sooner or later, if you are on any classic spiritual schedule, some event, person, death, idea, or relationship will enter your life that you simply cannot deal with. Using your present skill set, your acquired knowledge, or your strong willpower. Spiritually speaking, you must be led to the edge of your own private resources. At that point, you will stumble over a necessary stumbling stone, as Isaiah calls it, or to state it in our language here, you will and you must lose at something. This is the only way that life, fate, God, grace, mystery can get you to change, to let go of your egocentric preoccupations and go on the further and larger journey. I wish I could say this was not true, but it is darn near absolute in the spiritual literature of the world. There is no practical or compelling reason to leave one's present comfort zone in life. Why should you or would you? Frankly, none of us do unless and until we have to. We've talked about this a lot of times, haven't we? When you're in a great spot in life, you're just going to want to stay there forever. It's not going to motivate you to any sort of change. It's when it gets uncomfortable that you're going to be motivated to change. Just to read that again, there's no practical or compelling reason to leave one's present comfort zone in life. Why should you or would you? Frankly, none of us do unless and until we have to. The invitation probably has to be unexpected and unsought. If we seek spiritual heroism ourselves, the old ego is just back in control under a new name. There would not really be any change at all, but only disguise. Just bogus self-improvement on our own terms. That's a fascinating paragraph. Looks like William really is enjoying it. But think about that. You know, so often we're all about self-development, but as soon as we're about self-development, that's all ego, right? That is a conscious, intentional trying to work ourselves into a better, advantageous spot in life. What he's talking about here is these real stumbling stones, these real moments where we're taken to the precipice and we have to decide whether we're going to leap into the trust of God or not, and really grow or not, are ones that take us by surprise. If we plan them out, that's more ego planning. It's a fascinating concept here, and something that we have talked about in the past, but I think he puts it together really well in this paragraph. Now, do you think that's right? Okay, William does not think it's right. You want to elaborate, William?
Well, I think you and I and this group, we've had this debate before. This idea that, we progress at the pace of our pain, basically, which is one of your lines that I enjoy repeating. It makes sense that the stumbling is required for certain types of growth, but I resist the idea that we can't consciously, without the fall.
Wait, say it again. When you broke up, you resist the idea that what?
We can't consciously, without having taken the fall, embarking on some journey of, meaningful spiritual growth that goes beyond just an egoic exercise.
So you think we can do it without the fall?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on to that thought for just a second. Let me read the next paragraph and see if it changes your mind or anybody else's. He writes, any attempt to engineer or plan your own enlightenment is doomed to failure because it will be ego-driven. You will see only what you have already decided to look for, and you cannot see what you are not ready or told to look for. So failure and humiliation force you to look where you never would otherwise. What an enigma. Self-help courses of any type, including this one, if it is one, will help you only if they teach you to pay attention to life itself. God comes to you disguised as your life, as my friend Paula Darcy so wisely says. Okay, so is that changing your thoughts on this at all?
No.
Okay, so what are you thinking that we can do? We can engineer our own enlightenment plan to a certain degree?
Well, I think, and when Frank Billman was part of the group, he shared this thought. In fact, this is his thought, the idea that we can love, like genuinely love, making a commitment to genuinely love. We can move into these higher places of being. And as we love, as we become more identified with the other, and connected to the other, our ego and things of that nature begins to release its grasp on us. And I mean, I get the argument of the fall and why the fall is important. I just resist the idea that we always have to go through the fall and there's no other way.
Okay.
So I think the pathways are discomfort and love.
So you can just use a path of love that will never take you down. We don't have to go down before we go up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we don't have to go down. I mean, it's enriching when we fall and we have that perspective and so on and so forth. But, love is the only thing that's going to pick us up, so.
But even William, even love, in my opinion, is messy. I mean, love of whatever it is you're loving could still be painful in some ways. I mean, it just doesn't seem like it's a perfect lined path to just be love all the way through without some kind of a fumble or stumble or a misunderstanding or misconception or unrequited love. Or, I mean, to me, love is the answer at the end of the day, but it seems like it's a little bit of a zigzag. It would be for me anyway.
Yeah, so there.
It's both and, it's not either or. Can we say that?
Isn't being in this class designing our own enlightenment?
And that's a perfectly sound question, and that's really
Thanks.
that's the crux of it, isn't it? If anything that we do along these lines is engineering our own enlightenment, and that is doomed to failure, then why are we bothering? I mean, what's the point? What's the point of writing or reading a book like this? What's the point of spiritual direction at all? What's the point of spiritual formation? What's the point of going to church? What's the point of doing any of this stuff if really we just need life to kick us in the pants at some point when we least expect it? I mean, if that's really what he's talking about. In AA and 12 steps, everybody talks about hitting bottom, that you need to hit bottom before you can actually admit that you're powerless, hit that first step of AA, and realize that your life is unmanageable, and then allow yourself to submit to a power that's greater than yourself. But then there's those that say, okay, well, you don't actually have to wait till you hit bottom. You can bring the bottom up to you. But here's where I think the crux of it is. Obviously, I think that there's a reason to do what we do here in these groups. And there's a reason for me to be spending the last 20 years as a pastor and trying to teach. And I think there's a reason for us to be reading and doing all the things that we do in spiritual formation and contemplative practice. But I do think that all that we do in terms of intellectual reasoning and study and talk therapy and sharing is still taking us to the precipice. There is a point at which we're going to have to just jump. There's a point at which your thoughts run out, your minds run out, intellectual prowess is just not enough to get you where you really need to go in terms of real spiritual formation. And we'd have to get out of one vehicle and get into another vehicle. What is it that finally gets you to that breaking point where you stop trying to engineer and control your own enlightenment, and you allow yourself to move into that vulnerable and dependent place that we keep talking about over and over again. Now, maybe it doesn't have to be as dramatic a fall as somebody else's may be, and it doesn't mean that your whole entire life needs to come crashing down, but there has to be a break point for you at some point, I believe. And I think that's what Rohr is saying here as well. There has to be a point where you break with the linear progression of always trying to go half the distance and half the distance and half the distance so that you never get there. And you just make that intuitive leap into something completely different. And I think that's the break point he's talking about. And it usually comes in life, as he said, when you finally come up against something that you're just not equipped to deal with. You're just not equipped to go through. It can be a tremendous loss in life. I mean, look what Jackie is going through right now. And so many of us have encountered losses like that. For me, it was the breakup of my first marriage. That was something I just was not prepared to deal with. But it moved me in a whole nother direction. If you think about the shape of your lives and the real progress that you've made, it usually is coming through some sort of loss of identity, loss of meaning and purpose. So I think it is sort of a both and, because I'm totally with you, William and Tony. There has to be something that we're doing, but then, like with Kathy, at a certain point, even love, there's going to be a break point. There's going to be a loss. That really is what is taking us, I think, across serial finish lines, if you want to put it that way.
Mhm.
Any comments on that scheme?
Well, does that coming to that point you're talking about, I think about how many times I've personally have been wounded, and but every time I go through that, I have to get to a point where that doesn't control my life. I have to look beyond that to grasp a new beginning. And if that's what you're talking about, something like that, then yeah, I can see that.
Mhm.
It's that, remember that a couple of Sundays ago, I talked about that scene in the movie Jackie with the priest. And the priest is, this is Jackie Onassis, Jackie Kennedy, a week or so after the assassination. And she's trying to cope with the loss, and she just wants to die, and she's having all these problems. And she's looking for answers that are going to help to get her through. And there are no answers forthcoming. And the priest finally tells her that there comes a point in man's search for meaning where he realizes there are no answers. And when you get to that horrible, inevitable realization, you either accept it or you kill yourself, or you simply stop searching. That's it. I think there is a point that we get to where we realize we're not going to get answers in the way that we want them to give us a sense of security or certainty that we're looking for. But there is a way through that into a deeper sense of being. But it doesn't come intellectually. It doesn't come in the way that we want it. And it certainly is not something that we can control. It's something we experience. We experience it as a gift that we could never give ourselves, but it's not something that's under our control. And that's a completely different ball of wax. And I think if we don't get to that place, we're really never going to enter what Jesus calls kingdom. We're not going to be able to experience the quality of life that can only come through trust in a love that cannot be gained or lost, a degreeless love. It's not a matter of degrees and trying to inch our way up to something. It's a completely different quality. And I think the only way that comes is when we finally give up the illusion that we can somehow get this under our own steam. That's the way I would phrase it as best I could, Tony, and I don't know if that helps.
Sure.
I observe that our losses and our setbacks and our downfalls during the life, as you look back from the benefit of time that's occurred between the event and now, really are learning lessons, all of them, if you let them be. Because if you don't learn the lesson, you're usually not around any longer. So it sounds oversimplified compared to Dave's beautiful explanation, but these hardships that we face in life, they can be teachers or they can be destroyers. And it's really up to us in our walk with God, whether we decide to let them destroy us or let us teach us something.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
I get an image of coming to the, like the edge of a cliff, and that's hitting the wall, and this invisible wall, and kind of putting your hands out and letting yourself go and seemingly fall is a way to surrender to what you resist, and allows you to, start finding a new place to rebuild from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
At the precipice, we change, right?
right.
It's when
Yeah.
we've taken the last step we can possibly take, and it looks like there's no more, except to hit the first step, to admit that we're
Mhm.
powerless, to surrender, to let fall, and to engage in a completely different mode of transportation. I mean, it's we can throw all sorts of words at it, but at least if you can get the sense that there is a different way, a different quality of way forward. Once you hit the point where you realize you're not going to get it in the way that you've been looking so far, I guess is the best way I can put it. I'm not going to be able to get this thing by the throat and hold on to it and make it mine. I can't do it the way I did everything else in my life that I thought that I achieved. It's going to be a whole different quality. And it's an open-handed gift.
It reminds me of a,
Yeah, Kathy?
I'm sorry. I'm just saying, it reminds me of like a training program that's very methodical and very, factual, and you're learning this and you're going through this life and you're listening to this training. But the real learning, I think, is when people start telling their stories and you hear testimonials and you hear experiences from other people that are real life. That's where the real learning comes in. And then you hear how this training that you're being taught is now applied to this real life situation. So to me, those are the things that we would never know if we didn't really hear them or hear those experiences or stories from other people.
Mm-hmm.
And otherwise it's just bland learning, on a book, but it's more lively when you hear the actual experience of someone else. That's probably why AA is, I assume, is probably so rich, when you hear the true stories of people.
And then, of course, when you live it out yourself, that's where the rubber hits the road. First person, no hearsay. It's just you and pure presence, and then everything really changes at that point. But there is that break point that I think that he's trying to get us to see that we're after here. And it usually is going to be part of some kind of trauma, loss, sense of failure or falling. But it's when we're finally at the end of ourselves and we realize that we do have to submit to a power greater than ourselves if we really want to go through this and continue forward. We're at the end of ourselves. What's next? All right. So reading on, he says, so we must stumble and fall, I'm sorry to say. And that does not mean reading about falling, as you're doing here. We actually must be out of the driver's seat for a while, or we will never learn how to give up control to the real guide. And by that, all in caps, he means God. It is a necessary pattern. This kind of falling is what I mean by necessary suffering, which I will try to describe in the next chapter. It is well dramatized by Paul's fall on the Damascus road, where he hears the voice, why are you hurting yourself by kicking against the goad? The goad, or cattle prod, is a symbol of both the encouragement forward and our needless resistance to it, which only wounds us further. It seems that in the spiritual world, we do not really find something until we first lose it, ignore it, miss it, long for it, choose it, and personally find it again, but now on a new level. 3 of the parables of Jesus are about losing something, searching for it anew with some effort, finding it, and in each case, throwing a big party afterwards. A sheep, a coin, a son are all lost and found in Luke 15. followed by the kind of inner celebration that comes with any new realization. When something has become real for you, almost every one of Odysseus's encounters coming home from Troy are losses of some type. His men, his control, his power, his time, his memory, his fame, the boat itself, falling, losing, failing, transgression, and sin are the pattern. I'm sorry to report. Yet they all lead toward home. I wanted to just take a look at the three parables that he talks about here, just so you can see it in Jesus' actual words. Can you all see the screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, finally,
It's a
Jackie
little
has-
small, if you can make it bigger, Dave.
I don't know if I can actually. I don't know. I don't think it gets any bigger.
Thanks for trying.
Yeah, sorry guys. I'm gonna say Jackie finally has words to look at, but they might be a little small. So in Luke 15, you probably know these parables, the parable of the lost sheep. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Now, we sometimes just think of this in terms of God's love for each one of us, but open it up deeper within yourself. Because when Jesus tells a parable, he's telling it for our edification. So it in some way is illustrating the journey that we're all trying to take. This isn't just about Jesus' love for us in a way that doesn't affect us except in a passive way. It's also there to illuminate in a very active way how we engage the journey. That we need to lose that sheep and go through the process of searching for it and then come back and celebrate the transformation that has occurred in that journey. That's a rite of passage. Remember, we were talking about on Sunday, separation, transition, reincorporation. It's all right here. This short parable, there is a rite of passage in there. There is a hero's journey in there. Same thing with the lost coin. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. This is Jesus' way of trying to drive this point home, that this is the shape of our journey. This is what it looks like. And it starts with the loss, and then the process of finding again, and then the reincorporation and the ability to come back into our community with more to offer, a different perspective. And of course, the parable of the lost son, this is the prodigal son. And of course, you know this story. The son goes off, comes back, the elder brother is angry, and the father throws the party anyway. It's the same idea here, the same motif that he's giving us over and over again. And this is what Rohr is trying to get across to us. This is the shape of the journey, what it looks like. He says at the bottom of page 67, in the end, we do not so much reclaim what we have lost as discover a significantly new self in and through the process. Until we are led to the limits of our present game plan and find it to be insufficient, we will not search out or find the real source, the deep well, or the constantly flowing stream. Remember when we were talking about the book of Job? And we said in the original, the oldest part of the book of Job starts with him being a righteous man who lost everything. And it ends with God speaking from the whirlwind saying, "I'm God, you're not, get over it." Basically, that's the original poem of the book of Job. Later on, because that was so unsatisfying, the end caps, the bookends were put on. So now we have the story of the wager in heaven that explains why these bad things happened to Job. And then at the end, Job gets all his stuff back. But just like Rohr is saying, in the end, we do not so much reclaim what we have lost as discover a significantly new self in and through the process. The story of Job was much more true to human experience before those end caps were put on. Because Job doesn't necessarily, at least not in the story, get the stuff back that he lost. But he certainly understands something more about himself. that he can remain faithful to God, not curse him, to stay true to his principles, even through the face of severe trauma. And that makes him a very different person. So it's a way of looking at life that's very different, because the trauma and the difficulties we face in life become not the evil that we're trying to avoid at all costs and pray away, but something, even though nobody wants to face it, we realize at least that there is purpose in it at the same time. Alcoholics Anonymous calls it the higher power. Jesus calls this ultimate source, the living water at the bottom of the well, to the woman who keeps filling and refilling her own little bucket. There must be, and if we're honest, there always will be at least one situation in our lives that we cannot fix, control, explain, change, or even understand. For Jesus and his followers, the crucifixion became the dramatic symbol of that necessary and absurd stumbling stone. Yet we have no positive theology for such necessary suffering, for the most part. Many Christians even made the cross into a mechanical substitutionary atonement theory to fit into their quid pro quo worldview, instead of suffering its inherent tragedy as Jesus did himself. They still want some kind of order and reason instead of cosmic significance and soulful seeing. Now, that's a real mouthful, but basically what he's saying is we still want control. So we imagine the cross to be actually a form of control. Looking at it as a mechanical substitutionary atonement, that all we have to do is follow the rules, follow the law, do everything that the Bible, church, and doctrine tells us to do, and God is more or less obligated to fulfill his end of the agreement. That's a form of control. But really what he's talking to is this more or less this jump into the abyss. When you realize what Jesus' first followers would have been feeling when Jesus is killed, and everything that they were pinning their hopes for is suddenly gone, and they're now being hunted down by the authorities as well, and have to go into hiding, and everything that they've been pinning their hopes on for years is suddenly taken away. That was a stumbling stone. That was hitting that wall that they could not fix, control, or do anything about. Going back to that first sentence, there must be, and if we are honest, there always will be at least one situation in our lives that we cannot fix, control, explain, change, or even understand. Do you think that's true? Do you have such a situation that you've already experienced?
Yeah, I feel that way about my son and I can never do it right, it seems like.
Okay.
And he doesn't reach out to me, and I've tried and I can't do anything about it. I can't make him feel a certain way or act a certain way.
Mhm.
Right?
That's a great example, Linda.
I
Anyone
think
else?
I think you're lucky if you only have one situation in your life.
Amen. Amen. So,
But I like Linda's comment there because it really points to, we can't control other people,
That's right.
and if we want to have a relationship with them, then some transformation needs to happen, in terms of our judgments, in terms of our ego, in terms of whatever, so I can totally see just normal everyday interactions with other people we can't change, pushing this precipice that we're talking about here.
mhm.
I think life is a series of these experiences, mold and shape us and shape our journey and according to the way we file it after we have the experience.
Hey, let's just think about, what did the pandemic represent to every one of us worldwide, pretty much? but a situation that we can't fix, control, explain, change, or even understand. And everything that has happened downstream from that. I mean, there is a collective macro experience that we had to go through that has really changed the face of our society.
Mm.
So from personal events to macro events, what is happening to the people in the Ukraine? All of a sudden, they're just hit with an invasion that they can't fix, control, explain, change, or even understand. The rest of the world is having trouble understanding it. So these things are happening at the macro level, and then they're also happening in our personal lives, the way Linda is talking about.
Yeah.
Again, I can't get Jackie off my mind, what she's going through right now. She's hit with a situation she can't fix, control, explain. And even if you were able to go through your entire lives not having experienced anything that you weren't able to fix or control, or at least imagine that you could, what happens at death? Death is something we certainly can't fix, control, explain, change. It just is. And it's completely inexplicable, and nobody can tell us what's on the other side of it, which is why it's so scary. So this is what we're talking about. This is life. We got to accept that life is, I think, exactly as Judy's saying and William's saying, it's a series of events like this, that when they hit us, we're powerless. There's nothing we can do about them. So you either accept it and you kill yourself, or you stop searching for answers in the way that you were searching before. But it's like we've been talking about here so much, is that when life presents that paradox to us, and everything in us wants to choose one side or another so we can resolve it and get back down to equilibrium as we understand it, back down to some sense of peace. But rather than do that, if we can allow the paradox to stand, to not try to resolve it, but to move through it, and in the process, in the passage through the horns of that paradox, we are taken to a deeper place of understanding. That's really what this is all about. Life is experienced as unresolved. That's the real life experience. And if we can get comfortable enough with that to let it stand and let it do its work on us, that's where we really grow. And that's the second half of life experience.
I think that's where
Right
some
now,
of the,
go ahead.
I'm just gonna say, I just think that's where some of the challenges come in with people and their belief in God, because they want God to have this explanation for them on why these things happen, and they can't make any sense of it, and then they start doubting and questioning, and well, is there a God, and has he forgotten me? And so I can see the struggle with that too, just with the unexplainable. Why did this happen? Thought I was doing everything right. I mean, I know we've talked a lot about that too. So, but it's probably everybody's been through that, I would think, or at least every Christian who believes in God, or anyone who believes in God probably has gone through that doubt. Unexplained.
And that's exactly where we need to be.
Yeah.
In our fear, we imagine that faith is going to be the removal of doubt. And we've talked about this 100 times. Faith is not the removal of doubt. Faith is the ability to act in the presence of doubt, in the presence of uncertainty. If there weren't any doubt, then there wouldn't be any faith. As soon as we think we're certain, we're not walking in faith anymore. Faith needs doubt the same way courage needs fear to exist. And so life is lived very differently if you're going to live it following Jesus. If you really are going to move into the second half of life experience that Jesus calls kingdom, it's going to require very different muscles out of us. Doesn't Frank look better these days?
Yeah, he needs to shave though.
I was going to say that earlier, and I thought, just don't crack a joke here, Scott. But thank you, William, for confirming that I should have.
Charlie likes the Bible study.
Yeah.
It was all getting a little too heavy. We had to
He's
lighten
got
it up.
something to say
Yeah.
to the camera.
It looks like he's having a very good time.
Yes. It's so cute.
All right, let's see. Where do we leave off? Okay, right in the second full paragraph on page 68. We, like the ox and St. Paul, largely still kick against the goad instead of listening to and learning from the goads of everyday life. So what is he talking? What's the goad there symbolizing? What's the metaphor of the goad? It is these difficulties in life, these traumas, these unseen things that come and just knock the wind out of us, take us out at the knees. So we're going to kick against those. We're going to try to avoid them as much as we can. We're going to try to ensure ourselves against them. We're going to try to pray God's protection around us so that nothing touches us and everything goes our way. So that would be kicking against the goads. Christians who read such passages were still able to see that the goads were somehow necessary or even good. Suffering does not solve any problem mechanically as much as it reveals the constant problem that we are to ourselves and opens up new spaces within us for learning and loving. Now that's a crazy sentence there. Let's read that again. Suffering does not solve any problem mechanically as much as it reveals the constant problem that we are to ourselves and opens up new spaces within us for learning and loving. What do you think the constant problem that we are to ourselves that suffering reveals is? What is that constant problem that he says only suffering can reveal to us?
Well, for myself, it's, again, it kind of comes back to a control security issue, which really at first glance, though, is more having expectations,
Mhm.
you know, kind of in a hypothetical way. If there is a God, why is he allowing this type of thing? And because things are not going the way I expect them to, yeah, then it's maybe, and as I'm thinking out loud, maybe it's also pride, false pride involved with this as well too.
That's what I was thinking about.
Shorter answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
So the illusions we hold on to,
Okay.
you know, illusions of our control, certainty. Are we
Yeah,
thinking
I think you all are thinking along the exact same lines I'm thinking. It's a fear control cycle is the way I would put it. You know, all the basic human fears and our reaction to those fears is going to be to try to control them in some way. And you know, pride can be a way of control. You know, anything else that we try to do in terms of trying to create this risk-free, fully insured mode of life would be trying to whistle past the graveyard of our fears. And so suffering, even though it's not going to solve the problem that we face mechanically, it's going to reveal this constant problem, this fear control cycle that just keeps us running, keeps us on that hamster wheel, and open up new spaces within us for learning and loving. So beyond the fear control cycle, when we get past that and we actually get out to conviction and trust, something else opens up inside of us, a different way of approaching life. And he continues, here, Buddhism was much more observant than Christianity, which even made the suffering of Jesus into God's attempt to solve some cosmic problem, which God had largely created to begin with. So what was the cross supposed to solve?
The problem of original sin?
Absolutely, of course. You know, the fact that there was no way for human beings to cross the gulf that we were born into of this total depravity. And the only way that we are going to be able to cross that was with the sacrifice of perfect blood. So God creates the problem by creating us with original sin, and then he solves the problem with this mechanistic sacrifice on the cross. But from Rohr's point of view, it's missing the point. And of course, from our point of view as well, as we've been talking over the last years and months, is that there's a different way to understand the cross in terms of this. So Christianity made even the suffering of Jesus into God's attempt to solve a cosmic problem, which takes out our ability within our own circumstances and within our own lives to see how the same shape of the journey is being played out for us. so that the shape of Jesus' journey becomes something deeply personal and deeply instructive in terms of the way that we live our lives and the way we understand the things that we can't control, fix, or explain. This is the way that we need to start looking at this if we really want to be instructed by Scripture. The cross solved our problem by first revealing our real problem, our universal pattern of scapegoating and sacrificing others, which is just another expression of the fear control cycle. Why do we scapegoat and sacrifice others? Because it's another way for us to control, deflect the fears that we have about ourselves. The cross exposes forever the scene of our crime, which is a great way to put that. The ultimate scapegoating, the ultimate sacrificing of another, and then institutionalizing that in our doctrine. In the tale of Odysseus and in other stories from world mythology, the theme of loss and humiliation was constant and unrelenting, variously presented as the dragon, the sea monster, Scylla and Charybdis, an imprisonment, plague, or illness, a falling into hell, the sirens, a storm, darkness, a shipwreck, the lotus eaters, the state of fatherlessness or orphanhood, homelessness, being stranded on an island, blindness, and often the powerless state of poverty and penury. Sometimes it seems that half of the fairy tales of the world are some form of Cinderella, ugly duckling, or poor boy story, telling of the little person who has no power or possessions, who ends up being king or queen, prince or princess. We write it off as wishful dreaming when it is actually the foundational pattern of disguise or amnesia, loss and recovery. Every beauty is sleeping, it seems, before it can meet its prince. The duckling must be ugly, or there will be no story. The knight errant must be wounded, or he will never even know what the Holy Grail is, much less find it. Jesus must be crucified, or there can be no resurrection. It is written in our hardwiring, but can only be heard at the soul level. It will usually be resisted and opposed at the ego level. I like this last paragraph because that is such a thematic thing. I mean, so many of our movies now are on this same basic theme. You know, Luke Skywalker doesn't understand who he is the son of, who he is the continuation of. And so many of these hero stories, you know, where the person is you know, some kind of what do you call them? Superpower hero, and they don't realize it, and they have to come into that. They have to be sometimes drugged, kicking and screaming into using those powers. But if you think of it, every single one of us, there's that wonderful poem by William Wordsworth, where he talks about that our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting, and we all come into this world trailing clouds of glory. You know? We are all born disguised as mere mortal human beings who are fallible and unlovely and unlikable, and we do all these horrible things, and we're so frail. And yet, who we really are is this child of God. Who we really are is this incarnation and manifestation of something much deeper. And it's our whole life story to figure that out, to work through the disguise. And all of these stories, these myths, these legends, these fairy tales are all using that motif and using that imagery to point to us. And then we look at the Gospels and they're doing exactly the same thing. They're pointing the journey that we need to take, the unmasking, the subtraction, the stripping away of all the illusions and all the things that cover up our real identity.
So Dave, I want to pose a question. This is what I hear in my Bible study, because sometimes the women, they're more mature women than I am. They've been doing Bible study and discussions, and I look to them for advice and mature counseling. Every now and then they'll say, oh yeah, they'll talk about, let's say, a nephew or a son, or somebody who's dying, or a father-in-law, and they say, oh, has he accepted Jesus? You don't know. Well, you know, if he has, he'll have salvation. So now with our discussion here, I'm saying, is that not part of the fear of death or wanting certainty by saying, oh, okay. I'm just putting my stuff into them saying, oh, okay, let me accept Jesus because I don't want to be in this abyss of unknown. Oh, there's certainty of salvation. How is that different from this whole illusion of control?
Well, it's not. If their idea of accepting Jesus is what we were talking about on Sunday, is a formula or a ritual. If it's just saying a sinner's prayer, if it's being baptized, if it's some external formula or ritual that we go through, if it's accepting an orthodox theology or set belief, that would just be a superstition and a way of trying, like you say, to gain control over something that you can't control because it's a free gift. But our ability to just fall into the embrace is really what's at issue. We can never, ever, ever make a judgment about someone else's state of connection with God based on some sort of religious criteria. That's impossible to do. You cannot do that. I remember actually having a chance to just have a few words with Thomas Keating. And I don't know how we got on this subject. I guess you let Christians talk long enough and they're always going to end up on this subject, right? Because it's the one that's at issue. And his answer was, I really just hope that a lot of things happen in the dying process, because I don't know when they would happen any other time, And so it's like, we're saying, yeah, did they accept Jesus before they died? Well, did they say the words? No. But what happened in those last few nanoseconds before the lights went out? And who's to say that it has to happen before the lights went out anyway? I mean, these are things that we can't possibly know. And to finally get to the point where we realize that we don't have answers for these questions, and yet we still continue to live with faith and hope and gratitude in God. Now we're living Job's life. Now we're being transformed by our ability to live with uncertainty and still walk as though what we believe is true. That's what faith is all about. So I guess the long way around, Ellen, is saying probably in the way they are meaning this as a doctrinal or ritual practice, yes, I would say that would be a searching for certainty in an uncertain world. But the premise underneath it is not wrong. This idea of us being able to connect with God in such a way that we have a conviction, which is not the same as certainty, because conviction can't be proven or transferred to another person. It's what we are convinced of because of our experiences and our connection to God. That is going to make all the difference in the world, but it can't be measured by anybody else.
I mentioned this
I
here
don't know if
before,
that helped or
Dave.
not.
I mentioned this here before, Dave, but my dad used to have a favorite saying, seeing as he was in the war, observing war going on around him and his buddies getting shot and killed right next to him. He says, one thing I learned for sure, son, there are no atheists in foxholes. When we're up against the hardest things in life, who's to say what kind of transactions don't take place?
And someone can be prepared for a direct encounter with God in completely secular ways that have nothing to do with religion or anything that we would measure spirituality by, and yet they're more prepared to accept truth when it appears to them than maybe we are, and with all our religious training. So it's nothing that can ever be judged by another person, but it's still up to us to get to that place of finding our own convictions. And largely it's going to come from these difficulties in life. When all of our certainties are stripped away, what's left then? See, that's really the question. All right, well, we are at time. So Jackie, how you doing?
Hi there.
You still there?
I'm listening. Thank you for sharing. Hi, Sandy.
Hey, I'm here.
I told you we were going to throw you into the deep end of the pool, dear.
I bet. I'm like, I thought it's not kind of, it's not like a story that you can't come into the middle, but there's some deep discussion going on that if you're not familiar with like the kind of verbs that we use and stuff like that when we're discussing that, would be kind of seems like a lot. I mean, and Jackie, the people
I
that
find
are
it interesting. I find I enjoyed it actually, listening to everyone's perspectives.
that's what I was going to say. We have got a quality group of people here that are highly educated and in their first half of life, and highly successful, and in a lot of different professions. And so it's really a great group to bounce ideas off of. But sometimes we might get a little heady and we try to emulate Dave. I think Dave is brilliant. He's brilliant, like my brother is brilliant, like only the most brilliant person. I think that's why I'm drawn to Dave, because he reminds me so much of my brilliant brother, who's a patent attorney for Johnson & Johnson Pharmaceutical Company.
Right.
So that's what Dave reminds me of, our pastor. He's
Thank
so
you, Jim.
wise.
Man,
Dave
talk
is
about
big
kissing up
pharma.
to the teacher.
I
So-
took me a while to realize that that's what I feel comfortable with, Dave, because he reminds me of my brother. And but yeah, it can feel like a little bit deep. And you know what the thing is too? If you don't agree, that in this group, it's like, look what William did. The first thing he did was say, I don't buy this bottom stuff. I don't like it and I don't want it, you know. But I wanted to say one thing before we pause, because I'll forget by next week. And I have embraced the bottom in my art. It was my whole thesis, because that was the one step that you never want to go back to. You want to get it done and get it done right. You try, but we do keep going back to it. Like you guys are saying, it's true. It's never over. We're going to continue to have challenges. But as far as recovery is concerned, I did all of my thesis were these dark paintings so that I wouldn't forget. I did one bright painting of me coming out of it. All of them were remembering the bottom. And it was really important and valuable to me. So that's the way I looked at it. And I just wanted to share it real quick.
That's perfect, Sandy. That's perfect. And I just want to make one last comment before we break. And that's that, yes, with all the heady thought that we were throwing around today, here's the thing about that. We have to use the same tools that we use to build up our worldview and our belief system. We have to use the same tools to deconstruct that worldview, or it's not going to be seen as legitimate, not to ourselves and maybe not to anybody else. But after the deconstruction process is complete enough, the task is to step away from the whole process of thinking itself, and certainly step away from the overthinking, and step away from the whole illusion that we can think our way into salvation, think our way into kingdom, think our way into God's grace. We already have that. All we need to do is accept it the way a small child would. That's why Jesus keeps holding up the child, keeps holding up the person who wildly stands outside of the law as even being closer to kingdom than those who think they have the certainty and have it all figured out. So as heady and intellectual as sometimes our conversations get, it's only for the purpose of getting ourselves as quickly as possible to that precipice, to the point at which we realize we are not going to be able to think our way through, that we're going to have to realize we need to let go and just take that leap like anybody else does. And that's the whole key to this. And these stumbling blocks can help us to do that and are the trigger points for that. So,
hey, one other thing I wanted to say though was the Williams counterpoint was just beautiful and spot on. And it made me think so much of Jackie too, because I have never met somebody in my life that uses the word love and tells everybody love all day long comes out of Jackie. And I learned that from her. And it uplifts people, you know, and you can just find anything to say about in discussion that you love this about them or that. And she does it everywhere she goes all day long. That's what I love about Jackie. And I try to be like her. And then William just hit right on the word love, because that's really what God is, right?
amen.
Yeah.
I don't know if
great.
I don't know if William is hearing all these kind words you're saying about him.
Is
but-
he called?
Yeah.
We're
Oh, I
gonna
forgot I
make
was
him
muted.
watch the
Sorry.
recording.
I was nodding and smiling in agreement. Thank you.
Oh, we couldn't see you accepting all these great compliments there, buddy. All right. Well-
Crosstalk. We're not allowed to crosstalk.
Uh, Cross
Yeah.
talk, schmuck talk. You can do that here. Hey, Jackie, I hope we haven't scared you off and that we'll see
No,
you again.
thank you.
All right, dear. Scotty, give us a prayer for home.
Thanks, everybody. Father God, we're just so grateful that you're here, and wherever we are, you're there. You know our problems, you know our successes, you know our challenges, you know our bottom, you know our top, you know every aspect of our lives, Lord. And we look to you for our answers, for our comfort, for our peace, that peace that really surpasses our understanding. Help us not to lean on it, but simply acknowledge you in all our ways, trust you with all our heart, and then know that you'll fulfill your promise to make our path straight. Lord, we lift up a special prayer for Jackie and her family as they go through this next several weeks of challenging times in their lives, but ones that we all seem to have to face eventually. So just comfort her, strengthen her, give her wisdom and discernment for the choices and decisions that need to be made and handled. Surround her with love and comfort and care and compassion, Lord. We thank you and we praise you and we do it all in your holy name, Lord Jesus. Amen.
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 All right, everyone. See you on Sunday.
Thank
Good
you.
Good night, guys.
See you guys. Everyone.
Jackie.
Bye.
Night.
Bye.
Bye. Good
Good
night.
night.
Night,
Night,
everyone.
night.
Night, Jackie.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, Jackie.
Good night, Sandy. Good night, Jackie.
Good night,
Good night,
Scott.
Jordana. Good night, Linda. Good night, Dave.
Good night, Scott,
Dave.
Sandy, Jackie, Jordana, and Linda. The bitter enders stayed all
Good
the way to
night,
the bitter end.
everyone. Good
All
night,
right.
John Boy.
Thank you. Thank you.
All
Good
right. see you
night, Linda.
Sunday.
Good night, Dave. See you guys Sunday.